Thank you for joining us this morning for the Anchor Collection webinar with Ocean Conservancy. And one of the reasons I wanted to do this, obviously with a name like Anchor Connection, for those that don't know, I'm a very keen sailor. And I also live with a view of the amazing Pacific Ocean on Santa Monica Bay. So the ocean's something that's very dear to my heart. But I think as meeting planners, it's very dear to everybody's heart, because a lot of programs and incentives particularly are done in destinations where the water is a very integral part of what we do. So whether it's the beach or you're taking people out on excursions. And so I've actually recently joined as a business champion for change with Ocean Conservancy, and a pledge to support them. So, and also trained as a sustainable event professional. I try and have that sustainability element to a lot of the things we do. So I want to welcome Jacob Petersen for joining us this morning from Ocean Conservancy. So Jacob's actually the Associate Director of Events and Outreach. So he's one of us. He's Ocean Conservancy, but he's one of us. He's a meeting planner and used to work at the California Science Center. So he's got a lot of experience that hopefully is really relevant. So I just really wanted to have a focus on sustainability this morning, but also hopefully give some good information. So Jacob, I'm going to hand over to you. So let me just spotlight your video so we can see you. There we go.
Great.
And
awesome.
also,
well, welcome everybody this morning, and thank you. Yeah, sorry I didn't mean to interrupt you there.
No problem. I'm just going to change you to the host as well, so you can share your screen. There we go. Over to you. Thank you.
Awesome. Give me 1 second to pull up. Okay, so I'm going to, and just tell me if you can, do you see the entire slideshow?
And your notes.
And your notes. Yeah, all the
let
next
me try
slide.
to do, here, sorry, let me switch it to this. How about now?
Yeah, we still see your notes.
Still the same view at the moment.
Here, I'll do this. We'll make it, I don't know why. This is always the best part about, so I'm gonna just share it as a regular slideshow.
There we go.
Good?
There you go.
Okay,
Perfect.
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 Awesome. So thank you again, Cheryl, and thank you so much all for joining us. I know that we're kind of working across many different time zones here. So for those that are up a little bit earlier or those that are later in your day, just want to say thank you for joining me and joining us. So as Cheryl mentioned, I am Jacob Petersen. So I head up events at Ocean Conservancy. If you don't know Ocean Conservancy, we're the largest and oldest ocean conservation group in the United States. And so we've been in existence for almost 50 years. We actually celebrate our 50th anniversary in 2 years. So yeah, it's pretty exciting. So I just wanted to give you a little bit of background on me before I get started kind of talking about sustainability and events and just some of the stuff that I've learned from my kind of experience in events and also my background. So, so I actually have a degree in environmental science and management. And before that, I had a degree in English and humanities. I've been working in the event space for over 10 years. So I've started out actually in a little non-conventional way. I had moved to Los Angeles from the East Coast after finishing one of my degrees. And my original plan was to kind of move to the West Coast. I really wanted to live there, take up surfing, kind of relax for a little bit. Got really bored very quickly, did learn to surf. And so I ended up actually doing some volunteer work, which is how I landed an event. So I started doing some volunteering for events based in Los Angeles. I got hooked up with an event producer locally there and got to do some really cool events in the matter of a few months, from the opening of or doing Facebook's holiday party for their one of their beach locations. I got to do Outfest one year, which was pretty awesome. So Gay and Lesbian Film Festival. And then that's actually what brought me to the California Science Center, which is where I kind of started my events career. So over the last 10 years, I've been doing a lot of different events, from galas and fundraisers to worldwide speaking events, the 5Ks and movie industry parties in Los Angeles, science events. And then most recently, actually a month before COVID, I was at the Super Bowl in Miami, producing events for Ocean Conservancy as we were the official Super Bowl partner. So just before, I've been with Ocean Conservancy for 2 years now. I work for the Prevent Cancer Foundation, which is the largest cancer foundation that focuses on prevention early detection. I work for the Jane Goodall Institute for their founder, Dr. Jane Goodall, who you may know from National Geographic and her study on chimpanzees, and kind of traveled the world with her doing speaking engagements. And then, as I mentioned, the Science Center. So I just wanted to share a few photos of events that I've produced over the years. So as you can see, speaking engagements, the 2 photos on the right are actually from my time at the California Science Center. So for those that are Los Angeles or West Coast based, you'll remember that back in 2012 is when California got the Space Shuttle Endeavour, which is now permanently at the museum. And so we got to do events along the parade route when Endeavour landed at the LAX airport, and then we drove it through the streets. This is a photo from one of our galas that we did actually under the Space Shuttle. And then the one to the right is an Egyptian themed for our Cleopatra exhibit. And then these photos are actually from my time at Prevent Cancer Foundation. So I hosted, the photo on the left is from 2 years ago for a gala that we did for Singapore. And that event brought in about 1,000 people from kind of the philanthropic, diplomatic communities for kind of a night of fundraising. We raised $1.7 million on that night for the organization. And then the middle photo is from a 5K that I did at Nationals Park. For those that are familiar with baseball, that's the stadium here in Washington, D.C. for our team. So, and then here at Ocean Conservancy, just over the last couple of years, just some fun events that we've gotten to do, from the kickoff to our partnership for the Super Bowl, to working with the Miami Open for the Taste of Tennis event, some other fundraisers, beach cleanups, and then of course the Super Bowl. So this is the 20-foot by 20-foot activation that we did outside for Super Bowl Live that saw more than 100,000 people come through this booth. And it really was, we created it. This booth took about a year to create with the vendor that we chose. And it really brought in kind of the wonder and awe of the ocean, which is really what we were going for, and just to teach people about our work and why the ocean's important, especially when you're living in coastal communities like Miami. So just wanted to share that. And then I won't share too much about the organization. I know I've mentioned a few things. We do work across 9 different programmatic areas, and we really kind of focus on the work that we're doing and making sure that we are addressing all the problems the ocean is facing and coming up with practical solutions to actually fix those issues. So we've had a lot of really important work that has happened over the last 50 years. We are very well known for our beach cleanup. So, and I'll be sharing a little about that later in terms of our cleanups happening this month and next month. So we host the largest volunteer cleanup day for the ocean on the planet. We last year had more than 1 million people participate, over 100 countries. So it's pretty exciting. So just wanted to, before we kind of jump in, kind of wanted to frame the situation that we're facing kind of as a global community. And that really is kind of the problem of sustainability. So like I said, I mentioned I have a degree in environmental science and management. And so basically, when we think about sustainability and environmental sustainability, it basically means that there's a balance in nature. And so there's a balance in nature, and we're preserving it for future generations. I think for anyone that's on this call, especially those of us on the West Coast that are very environmentally minded, we know that that is not happening right now. Climate change is a real threat. We're taking too much out of our planet, oil and gas and natural resources, and we're putting too much in, so carbon and plastic and pollution. And so this just gives you kind of a sense from the plastic angle, which is what I focus on, or what Ocean Conservancy focuses a lot of attention on. So there's more than 8 million metric tons of plastic that enter the ocean every single minute of every single day. So that's like if we were to take a garbage truck, as you see on the screen, and dump it into the ocean every minute, and you kind of see the aftermath of what that looks like on the beaches.
Jacob, where were these pictures taken, may we ask?
Sure. So the 2 on the right were taken, the one on the top and the bottom were taken in Southeast Asia. on different cleanups that we've done. And then the one in the middle is a bird that I believe was in Florida that was found. So we see a lot of these issues as it relates to beaches looking like this. You obviously don't see this in the United States too much, but in Southeast Asia, because the waste management is not like it is here in the United States or in Europe, it's not as sophisticated. And so what happens is, and I won't go into too much detail, but basically there's not a lot of waste management infrastructure, obviously not a lot of recycling. And so it goes into the rivers, and then the rivers deposit it into the ocean. And so then it washes up on the shores just like this. And I think for those that know about kind of the plastic pollution problem, you probably know about the Great Pacific Garbage Patch, which is in the middle of the ocean. There's actually a few of them. And so that's also kind of, you know, from all this plastic waste that's going in. And it really kind of ties back to that we as a society we've kind of gone over the threshold of what our planet can take. And so it's really important for us to keep that in mind. And it's really why I want to kind of talk about what we can do in events to mitigate this problem, because events happen every single day all around the world. It's really, you know, even, you know, prior to COVID, it's really everything that we do as meeting and event planners. And so from weddings to conferences to everyday, you know, fundraisers and galas and everything in between, you know, there's so much waste that could go into that. And so I just want to kind of talk about some simple solutions that we can go over. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and then I'll pop it back on so I can go to my notes. Can everyone see me okay?
Yep.
Perfect. So if you give me just 1 second. So this is basically the section I want to go over, which is just like ways we can transform our events into being both environmentally and ocean friendly. Plastic and waste is going to be a big part of this discussion. I'm not going to cover everything because obviously we don't have enough time to go over every possible thing. But what I would like to do is just be able to go over some of the stuff that I see that can be really helpful. And then also be able to take questions. And I want this to be an open communication. So we're a small enough group that if you do have a question, feel free to put it in the chat box and they will stop me and interject to be able to ask that. So, so I first want to stress that I think when we think about environmental sustainability in events as meeting planners and professionals, we don't have to immediately go to, okay, this needs to be a zero waste event. I think that can be rather, it can be overwhelming because there's so many different things that we have to think about, and it's impossible in some ways to be able to create a zero waste event without spending a lot of money. A lot of the environmental, you know, changes or sustainable changes that we make in events do come at a cost. Like the environmental and sustainable products do cost more money. But there are also ways that we can do things that will save money. And so I think it's a matter of picking and choosing what you think is going to be the best for your event and for your audience, and be able to make small changes along the way. And then maybe, you know, progress and make bigger ones, you know, the next year, especially if you're doing annual events. Like you change some things this year, you see how it works, and then next year you do more. So I just want to stress that. And so basically just starting out, some things to consider, you know, questions that I have going on in my mind when I think about this topic is, you know, what does the waste footprint look like for your event as is? Or have you thought about doing like an audit from previous years for events that you've worked on in terms of like thinking through the event and what actually causes the biggest waste and what you can actually help to mitigate that? Can technology help you achieve, you know, your sustainability goals or your environmental goals for your event? What is the location of your event and how are people getting there? Transportation is a leading cause of climate change. So if you're hosting your event in a far off place where people have to fly there and then they have to get a hotel and drive, like all of that kind of goes into the equation of, you know, basically, you know, the carbon footprint of that event. And obviously there are events, I think a lot of people on this call probably do international events, and I'm not saying don't do international events. I'm just saying, you know, think about these things when you're actually planning the event. And then what's important to your attendees and your client and your audience? And then are there nearby protected areas that you need to think about? So if you're doing an outdoor event that's on a beach, you want to be really cautious about, you know, the waste and the trash and things, because you don't want it blowing off into the ocean, or you don't want, animal life around to be able to, to get a hold of it. So those are some kind of qualifying questions. A lot of what I'm going to talk about is focused on waste, right? Because we're talking about environmental sustainability, we're talking about sustainability and events. So waste is impossible to mitigate altogether. On average in the United States, people generate more than 4.5 pounds of waste every single day. So when we think about that and trying to curb that, it really is, what can we introduce into these environments that becomes more reusable, and that we're not immediately using something and then putting it in the trash, because that's where the problem begins. And that's where, when we see all that plastic on those beaches or in the ocean, that's what it's coming from. So in my mind, as an environmental, doing environmental science, I kind of look at, the Environmental Protection Agency and some other key agencies that talk about waste management. And so they kind of have 4 different categories of how they categorize it. So the first is that you do source reduction and reuse. So in events, that means, trying to cut out waste as much as possible, using reusable products, and really being conscious about the footprint that you're leaving. The next phase is recycling and composting. So whatever you can't reuse or reduce, the next step is to try to recycle or compost it. The third phase is energy recovery. So that usually relates in environmental science terms, and I won't get too technical, but it usually just relates to they call it waste to energy. So incinerators that burn off obviously cause pollution, but then they have energy that's recovered from that. And then the last piece is treatment and disposal. So as we kind of go into the next pieces, I want to talk about what you can do before events, what you can do during events, and then kind of afterwards is kind of how I'm breaking it up. And then I'll discuss a little bit about, in my mind, some of the top, when you're thinking about waste reduction or sustainability, a lot of that goes to water and energy use. And there's a couple things that I'll talk about there. So I think the biggest thing when you're planning an event before, think about the products that you're using, the rentals, what those things are coming in packaging wise, and what's actually needed to do the event versus what you would like to have or what adds value. It's always good to be able to buy products that are made from recycled content. So, that way you're buying a product that is already kind of environmentally sound. And so therefore, if you do have to throw that thing away, at least you're using something that has already come from a recycled source. For decor items and things like that, try as much as possible to use rented items that you're not throwing away, and that have some reuse life after that, or that you're buying stuff and then you can reuse it for another event. I think that's always very powerful to be able to kind of reuse those different things. When you're talking to your vendors, for instance, when I was in the gala scene, florals is a big thing, right? You always have floral decor on your tables and throughout the event. Little things like just talking to your vendor to see if they have to use plastic on their florals when they're bringing them in before they're setting them up. Little stuff like that can really reduce the amount of waste that you have at your event. And just kind of talking through, I think, with your vendors is important. If you have certain environmental or sustainability goals, letting them know that you're trying to make it as zero waste as possible, or that you're really trying to cut back in these areas. I think communicating with your different vendors, a lot of them will understand, a lot of them probably share similar practices. And I think at the end of the day, we all care about the planet that we're on, and we care about the environment. And so we want to try to do as much as possible to mitigate the waste that we are creating through our events. Little things like being able, obviously glass and plastic are more damaging to the environment from a multitude of different ways. Plastic, as you see, so even switching to things like aluminum or using, reusable items. And I say that knowing COVID, during the time of COVID, it's a little bit different. At events, we can't just put water refill stations everywhere and everyone brings their own bottle. That presents a health risk in some ways. To give you kind of a real life example of what I did, in this kind of category. So for the Super Bowl, the booth that I showed you that we created, we were really conscious, knowing that something like that creates so much can create so much waste, take so much energy, transporting it, all of that, you know, creating it. We made simple changes, like for instance, the floor, we decided to go with a floor that was made out of recycled rubber that was from used tires. And so that not only presented, we were using recycled content, as I mentioned before, but it also provided, it was a talking point for us so that we could talk about, we had giant stickers on the floor that was like, you're standing on recycled, you know, recycled tires. Like, we care about the environment, we care about the ocean. It ties back into the messaging of the event and what we were talking to people about. It also was comfortable for our staff. They were standing on it. Our booth was open sometimes for up to 14 hours a day. Could you imagine standing on like wood or carpet versus like something that has a little bit of give? So there were a lot of things that went into just little decisions like that. Something else, you know, to think about is in your giveaways that you're doing at events, you know, trying to think about sustainable options. I think everyone, obviously, anyone that's attended an event or a conference or a meeting, you know, you're constantly getting, I don't know how many bottles I have, you know, in my cabinet right now from all the different things I've attended. But think about like tying it into what you're talking about at your event. So if you, for instance, your event is going straw-free for the first time, maybe give people a metal straw, and then it ties back into your messaging on why, oh, sorry, my light just went bye-bye. So hopefully this is still fine. So just, you know, think about how you're tying that message and that brand in. For Ocean Conservancy, one of the events we had a lot of people, a lot of donors and stuff, and so they travel a lot. And so we decided to do reusable utensil sets that are made out of bamboo and straw. And so that was really popular. People really enjoyed it. They're like, oh, I can take this on the airplane. I don't have to use plastic forks and spoons. That's wonderful. So people really enjoyed that. And then some of the other things to think about before an event is, you know, can you host the event outside? I think people don't really think about how impactful that is for the environment. If you're not hosting something in an indoor setting, you're not relying on heating and cooling, you're not relying on lighting. There's a lot of things in terms of sustainability that you can save there. And I just want to stop if there's any questions before
yeah, actually, you've talked about potentially there is a cost element to going sustainable, but you know, with regard to things, with regards to the flooring, you know, utensils, so those examples you've referenced, I guess what kind of percentage more than a regular budget would you say that represents?
So I think it depends on how much. So for instance, when we were doing the Super Bowl, obviously the rubber floor cost more money. And so we planned for that. Actually, that event we planned for so far in advance that we were getting kind of running the numbers before we went through our budgeting process. So our organization works off of kind of a fiscal year budget. I think it really depends. You know, sometimes it's a nominal cost where it's, you know, maybe 10% more, 15% more. Sometimes it could be more, like this rubber floor costs, you know, I don't know, 5 times as much as like a carpet. And so that was something, you know, that was obviously had a significant expense to it. And I think that goes back to me saying, you know, pick and choose, because there are things that do cost more money, and maybe it's, you can't afford it this year, but you can do it next time. And if you, for me, like working in the nonprofit space, you know, we try to keep our event costs pretty low so that we can keep our fundraising high, and the majority of the money goes to support the programs. But if you can have a talking point to, for instance, like a funder, and be like, we're really conscious about the environment, we may be able to raise more money that then can cover some of those costs. So I don't know if that's helpful.
No, that's great. And a great point from Marty in the chat, that actually, you know, potentially from where the conversation started many years ago, that price differential is probably not as big as it used to be, because it's become more part of the common agenda, if you will, and the conversation that everyone's trying to work towards those common goals, hopefully.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a really good point, because as he stated, or, you know, these things were really expensive 10 years ago, right? Like it was not like compostable cups may have been a thing 10 years ago, but there was one company doing it. And so now I think we have a lot of options for vendors that we can go to, and a lot of options, you know, for what we can actually purchase. And then there are it's becoming more normal. So the cost then goes down as was stated. So yeah, that's a really great point to make.
And I think another point you made, but it's also referenced in the chat, about buying locally. So you're reducing the transportation cost of your product, not only your delegates.
Yeah, absolutely. I actually try to work with local vendors as much as possible when I'm doing events. And obviously when it comes to, I'll talk a little bit later about kind of like food is a really big piece of sustainability. And so if you buy locally in that area as well, it's really helpful. I think people tend to forget transportation costs for, you know, even when you're doing giveaways and stuff. It does add up in terms of the environmental impact. If you're shipping something from the West Coast to the East Coast or from China to the United States versus buying something in the US that's made, it does have a significant environmental footprint. And transportation is the leading cause of climate change. I mean, and the pollution associated with it. So it's really, you really can have big impact there when you're thinking about buying locally.
Fantastic.
I think the first event I did as a green meeting was I chaired the Site International Conference in 2007, and we were very fortunate to host it in Monterey, California. And I think when you're in an environment like that, that produces so much of the produce that you get in the US anyway, it just made sense to say, let's do this event as think globally, eat locally. And we put a cap on it of 100 miles. So nothing that we had at that event came from more than 100 miles. So all the wine, all the food, everything. And that, the nice thing is, and like you said, it's like pick some little things to start with. And it's been nice to see even things that were implemented that long ago are now still part of the conference in terms of not printing additional programs and some of the environmental impact things we put in. So it is a case of pick a few things that you can do, and based on your location, there's certain things that make more sense than others. And that was kind of an easy choice to make for that particular event.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. And actually that is a nice segue into kind of the next kind of topic that I wanted to talk about, which was like looking at how you can make differences during your events. We talked a little bit about like what to keep in mind before your event, but also during your event, there's a lot of things. So we've talked a lot about kind of reusable items and the cost has gone down. So it's really good depending on what type of event you're doing, if you're doing conference or a reception or whatever, anything that has food and beverage, like really try to use reusable serviceware options like plates, actual plates and cups and forks and napkins. You know, those, yes, they have a water component because you have to wash them. And so there is an environmental impact there, but it's much better than throwing away, you know, a bunch of plastic cutlery. And that's actually something in the last couple of years that we've seen a big uptick when we're doing our beach cleanup. And you'll see in one of the slides that I share a little bit later, that plastic cutlery is in one of the top 10 items that we find on beaches. So we know that it's a problem. We know that people are using it at exponential rates and they're throwing it in the trash, and then that is ending up in the ocean. So as much as we can try to mitigate using those, you know, those options, or using compostable products. So those are obviously very big when it comes to compostable cups, which I'm sure you've seen that look like plastic, but they're made from plant fibers, or compostable straws. I mean, that's kind of all the rage with a lot of straw bans taking place in the last year or two. So I've seen, you know, working for an ocean organization, we've seen a lot of really inventive straws. I've seen pasta straws, which are fascinating.
Those are fun.
There are, you know, silicone straws, there's paper, there's bamboo, so there are just a lot of different options out there, which I think is really awesome. And one thing to keep in mind, compostable products are great. And in the United States, we don't have to worry about it so much because, like I said, our waste management is so good here. But in other countries, like compostable products may not be as big of an impact, because if it's going to end up in the ocean anyways, they don't compost in the ocean. And so that's why it's better to try to use products that are reusable versus ones that are compostable thrown away. And then Cheryl, one of the things that you had mentioned was signage and printed materials. So as obviously technology has greatly advanced, we've been able to do everything digitally. We obviously see that with COVID-19. I think, you know, take a moment to think about, as meeting planners, like what 2020 means for us. It's a massive shift from doing high energy in-person events to being on your computer and on Zoom and trying to figure out how to do everything virtually. Speaking from experience of being, you know, what, 7 months into this process. It's been a lot, like, and I'm sure everybody on this call can relate. Like, it's not ideal, and we want 2020 to go away, and we want to be back, you know, doing things in person. But there is a technology piece that we're allowed to do things like we're doing right now, where we can connect on video and have conversations. We can, you know, have programs digitally. We can have printed things that we don't need to print anymore. Signage can be on, you know, on digital screens. There is still a use for some of these printed materials, but just, I think about it smarter when you're doing it. Like, do you actually need to print everything that you have? Or if you, for the things that you are putting on paper, again, go back to using recycled content. Be careful about the type of paper that you're printing on, or, you know, try to make things smaller. We had some great, we did, when I was with Jane Goodall Institute, we did a lot of speaking engagements. And so we were constantly handing out brochures about our organization, because we're, you know, Jane is speaking in front of 10,000 people. Everyone's waiting in line for a book signing. We want people to know about our organization. We want to promote our brand and get people to make donations. So we ended up coming up with a business card that, or excuse me, a brochure that was the size of the business card, and it folded out kind of like that, and in an accordion style. It was very inexpensive to produce. It had a very low impact in terms of, if somebody threw it away, it wasn't as big of a deal as like a trifold. And it was easy for people to take away because they could just slip it into their pocket. So I think that's an example of being able to create something that is environmentally impactful and also inexpensive. It was, I think, I don't know, 1/10 of the cost of our regular brochures that we were printing. So it does make an impact. And then for when I was planning the 5K, when I was at my previous organization, obviously it's outdoor event, it's big. There's, I think we had like 2,000 people attend it. So we wanted to promote our sponsors. And so we would buy these gigantic vinyl banners that I'm sure everyone on this call has used before, that you get printed, and they're not cheap. And then you, at the end of the day, if you have sponsor logos on them, like, you don't know if those sponsors are going to come back the next year, or it's going to be different sponsors. You'll have a different theme or whatever. And so that goes right into the trash. And so what I did the first year that I started planning it was that we bought a banner, a vinyl banner, and then the sponsor logos were detachable. They were just, you know, kind of Velcroed on or something. And so we could switch them out every year. It cut the cost of reprinting that banner every year. And then it also saved us from throwing away that massive vinyl thing. And I think as much as other signage, like galas is kind of the same thing. You always have the bathroom, or sorry, the signs that have a, you know, say bathroom and have an arrow pointing, or maybe you have a press check-in table, or, you know, a floor plan or whatever. All of those you can, you know, definitely reuse throughout the years to be able to save them from going into the trash. So, and I'll stop there. I think that, you know, obviously there's a lot of things that we can do when it comes to being like during the event, but I would like to save some time to talk a little bit about like after the event and what we can do. And then what I see as some of the, when it comes to like water and energy, like what are the biggest sustainability moves that you can make there, and then leave some time for questions. So, but if there's anything in the chat.
So Jacob, you were just saying about doing events outside. So the impact at the moment with the restaurants being outside and everybody having to do things outside is a positive thing for us at the moment, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think as we can think about, you know, doing that more and more, there is a lot of, obviously, the health impact of that, right? So you're not, people don't want to gather in a room with 200 people. Maybe you'll do something outdoors, you know, and later this fall or in the spring, depending on where your location is and like what COVID looks like for you. But yeah, I think we'll do more and more outdoor, and there's a health impact to that. There's an environmental impact for that. And also potentially cost savings, right? Like if you're not renting a massive venue and you're doing something outside in that venue, that could be a little bit more cost prohibitive or cost effective. So.
Good, thank you.
And then, so just looking at after the event, so I think this is where the biggest waste impact happens, as I think everybody knows. So when you have worked an insane amount of hours for a day for that event and it went amazing, and then all the guests leave and now you're left cleaning everything up, or your crew is, or the venue or whoever, that's when you actually start to see the waste that's associated with your event. So from disposing of the trash and the signs and the papers that weren't used, to all of the glass, plastic, and aluminum from people for their beverages, or all the food waste that's associated. I mean, the list can just go on and on, like florals, all of that. I think as much as you can, try to donate a lot of that. So I've done that in a lot of my events. For the 5K that we did, we would donate all of our leftover food and beverage to a local youth shelter or to a drug rehabilitation center here in DC. And they were always really excited to have that for the people. You know, the same thing with like florals. We would encourage actually people in our galas to like take arrangements with them. Obviously not the beautiful vases that they were in or like the actual arrangements, but they can pick them up and take the flowers. And then we would also try to donate those to like local hospitals or nursing homes. There's been, I think, the wedding scene, I think, shows a lot of genius ideas. I don't know if you all have seen where like people can, you get together and you decide on your decor and flowers, and then you like rent it with another person that's doing an event in the same day. There's a lot of that happens. You know, I think there's even specific apps or companies that kind of focus on that. So I think as much as we can think about like what is actually going into the trash, what we can, again, reuse, what can we donate? I think some of this is COVID dependent, right? So, and there's also just like local laws depending on where you live that like you can't, like for instance, for a gala, you can't necessarily donate a bunch of meals that have been sitting on tables, but you might be able to donate the leftovers that can be put into to-go containers. So I think that's, you know, something to keep in mind. It also gives you a good idea. So when you do your next event, and if you are trying to make some small changes, really pay attention to, at the end of your event, what actually is being thrown away, and get a sense in terms of like, was that item or whatever it was important? Or can you think about like, maybe you don't, like you printed 1,000 of something and you really only needed 500. You can learn from your prior mistakes or learn from just like what happens. Of course, I think as event planners and meeting professionals, we have a plan A, a B, a C, a D, an E. And we obviously plan for every occasion. We plan for technology to go down, and we have the paper version. But I do think, you know, some of that we can be more conscious about what we're actually spending our money and time on, and making sure that we're not getting rid of a lot of those things. So I want to stop there. There's a couple other thoughts I have just in terms of like water and energy footprint. When I think about when I'm doing my events, obviously power is a big thing. Energy, you know, when you're talking about sustainability for events and the impact that it has on the environment. A lot, even places in the United States, a lot of our power is linked to coal-fired power plants. A lot of it's not unrenewable. And so it's good to think about like when you're using lighting and AV and power and anything else that you're needing, like getting a sense from your vendors if they're making sure that they're using the most environmentally friendly or you know, the most conscious version, or with your venue, making sure that like they've done simple things like switching to LED, or ask them like, hey, what do you run your building off of? Do you use alternative energy like wind or solar? Because that could also be a talking point for your event. If your venue is doing something that's tied into your sustainability goals, you can actually talk about that, which is good. And then the other piece of it is the food and beverage piece. So we know that food has a massive impact on our planet. If anyone has seen, I think, any documentary in the last like 5 or 10 years on meat consumption, for instance, we know that it has a massive water and energy use. And then also the transportation of that food, especially when we talk about buying locally. So we can buy locally for the food that we're doing. Talk to your caterers and understand where their food comes from. Think about trying to reduce the meat that you have at your event. It's something that I think about, you know, as someone that works in the environmental space. You know, we talk a lot about climate change, and meat consumption is definitely linked to that in a lot of ways. So for events that I put on, we really try to limit our beef and pork. We really focus on sustainable seafood. We focus on chicken and vegan and vegetarian options. And believe me, I personally am a vegetarian. I think a lot of people on the West Coast probably have more of that mindset. I live in a reality where I know not everyone's going to be vegetarian. And so we do have to have meat options at our events. Like we can't just be like, oh, here, you just get lettuce and beans and hummus and nothing else. So I think being realistic about that, but, you know, giving people some different options. And I think that's something to keep in mind. So
Jacob, let me jump in if I may. There's some great chat going on. And so I'm going to reference Lauren. Thank you so much for your recommendations. One of which with regards to donating unused food to Chefs to End Hunger. So
great.
It's a great organization. Lauren, do you want to come on, if you wouldn't mind, and maybe talk a little bit more about the study on the food waste program?
She just said she doesn't have audio.
Okay, no worries. We'll do take a look, everybody, in the chat. Lauren's very kindly put a reference point there. And a link to look at more information. So we'll definitely be sharing these key resources from the chat. Also, as well as this is being recorded, and Anchor Collection does have a YouTube channel. So we'll be doing a rewind. So whether it's with a cocktail or a martini, you can look at it again next week.
Great.
Great.
Yeah,
thanks,
that's that's super helpful. And then, so sorry, give me go back to my screen here. I just wanted to, I'm going to stop there. I'm going to offer just a few closing thoughts, and then I'd love to be able to reserve like the last 10 minutes or so that we have just for any other questions or discussions. So closing thoughts for me is, you know, obviously COVID-19 impacts a lot of what we're doing with events. It really impacts what we're doing, you know, that could be available for environmental, you know, making it more environmentally friendly. So we kind of use that example of like the reusable water bottles and those type of things. But also, if you've been to a restaurant during COVID-19 for like outdoor seating, I've seen a lot of restaurants no longer use paper menus or use menus that are, you know, like in the plastic, and they ask you to scan the QR code to go look at it and go on their website. So I think there's also a lot that can be offered in terms of moving more electronically and realizing what we need to do in person versus what we can do virtually. Remember to start small and tackle the things that you can handle. As I mentioned, switching to more environmentally friendly options can come at a cost. Some are cost effective and they will save you some money, but some of them you do have to invest more time and money and resources into. So it's something to keep in mind. Make sure that you're communicating with your audience so that they know that you care about the environment and that you're being conscious of these things. And always be willing to accept feedback from them. I think people really do care, obviously, about our planet, and they care about what you're doing as a meeting and event planner, you know, to be able to help with the situation. Don't be afraid to copy or take lessons from other people's events. There's a lot of resources out there, and it sounds like there's a lot that have been shared in the chat, and I'm happy to share some afterwards as well. But there's a lot of resources out there and like what you can do and like where to start. At the end of the day, I think have fun with it. You know, it is making your event more sustainable, environmentally friendly, but that means you get to work with different items and products and you get to change things up. And so you really should enjoy that piece of it and change it and make it different and just have a good time with it. And then lastly, I think, you know, just I want to, you know, stress again that like we're living in kind of unprecedented times. Like this is, obviously, COVID is impacting, I think, all of us in many different ways, from being able to travel to hosting events virtually versus in person. And so 2020, at the end of the day, is just not great for any of us, I think, in a lot of ways. And I think we can admit that and be honest about it. But I would love, you know, we're doing a lot of Ocean Conservancy for virtual events. We hosted a virtual fundraiser for the first time back in July that ended up raising $35,000, and we didn't really pay a lot for it. Like the costs were very minimal. So there are some good things I think that come out of it that we can share. But I would love to kind of keep this time open for any questions or discussions. I know we're a small enough group that we probably can have some discussion. And then at the end, I will pop on those slides about the International Coastal Cleanup, where you can find a location near you that you can do a socially distanced beach cleanup, either with a small group or you can do it by yourself, and just some kind of tips to keep in mind in September and October for that. So.
Great. Well, we actually, Lauren's very kindly got tech enabled. So I'd love to bring Lauren in to talk a little bit more about the resources and studies that she's done to share her experience. Lauren.
Can you hear me?
We can.
Yeah, we can.
Awesome. Yep. So I'm Lauren. I work at Terranea Resort in Rancho Palos Verdes. So we were super lucky. A few years ago, we worked with World Wildlife Fund, and that link I sent in the chat, hotelkitchen.org, we were part of, there were 10 hotels that did a case study about food waste in the hospitality industry. And they found so much food waste in, you know, buffets, events, and we started working with a company called Chefs to End Hunger. So how they work is we order food from Vesta Food Service. So we get, you know, different products from them. And then their nonprofit sector is Chefs to End Hunger. So whenever they drop off food that we buy from them, any product, they will pick up any leftover food that we have from events, or from, right now it's from our employee cafeteria. So any untouched, unserved food, we're able to donate through that program. And on that website, there's all different types of hotels. You know, obviously a lot of those have events, so there's really good resources. They call it a toolkit, and you can just take all the ideas that we went through and then kind of skip forward to all the pros and cons and figure out what works for everybody. So it's a pretty cool resource.
That's great. Thank you for sharing.
Of course.
I just want to say as well that, no, thank you, Marty, for putting the information on there about the EIC, Events Industry Council. I now have education on sustainable events. I actually did my sustainable event professional certification when it was still GMIC. And it was actually like a 3 or 4 month program that we did, online webinars and learning. And we actually finished at the GMIC conference. At the time it was in Atlanta. And as part of it, each of us had to take an audit role. So I was doing audit on food and beverage, and that was a pre-planning in terms of, you know, where are they buying from? Are they using sustainable purveyors? Are they composting food that isn't being used? Are they using, you know, reusable? Are they using paper? Are they using plastic? Are they putting condiments in bulk instead of an individual? So it's really interesting when you get into that kind of depth, but there were checklists for everything from vetting your vendors, from your transportation right the way through to AV and things to look for. So I would stress that, you know, if it's something that is close to your heart, like it is with me, take the time to do some education, whether it's the MPI or EIC, whether it's a day or half a day, but it's amazing what you learn. And then I think it makes you then put that into your everyday life and your business. And even as a small business, you can still do some small things that help along the way. I mean, a couple of things I did when I set up the business, my business cards are actually made from recycled t-shirts. And it actually makes them more durable, which is interesting. They're available on Moo, and it's something small, but it's also a talking point. It shows that, like, even the little things. And then my giveaways are actually little reusable shopping bags that've got anchors all over them. But the company that make them are also a supporter of Ocean Conservancy. So this is kind of a double bang for your buck in terms of it helps not using the shopping bags, but also it's more money going back to Ocean Conservancy. So just the little things that you can do at the start and think that process through. I think once you've done some of the training, it then is in your mindset to look at that when you're doing something. So any other questions, comments that anybody would like to share at the moment before Jacob winds up here? Feel free to unmute. But thanks, Chris, for doing a great job of moderating the chat there. Chris, for those that haven't met him, is normally based in New York and is part of Anchor Collection for the East Coast. So Jacob, back to you to wind up with your the ocean cleanup.
Yeah. Thank you again, Chris, for doing that. It was definitely, as I'm trying to read my notes, I wasn't paying as much to the chat, so I appreciate you kind of jumping in and stopping me at a couple of those different points. So I'm going to go back to sharing my screen real quick, if you give me a second. And so I just wanted to kind of touch actually on the point that you were just making, Cheryl, is, you know, all of these actions that we take may seem small, like you deciding not to use plastic straws at your event, or cutting back on paper, or just doing what you can, like giving out a reusable item that then someone is now going to go and use. But those really cute, you know, reusable bags that have anchors on them, they're going to use them for their grocery trips or whatever. It's kind of it's a ripple effect in the way that we think about how accountability happens. But it also, if you think about if all meeting and event planners did what we are doing, if they all did their best to be able to think about the environment when they're planning their events, the impact on a global scale is quite massive. And I think if we think the same thing for individuals, if everybody just acted a little bit more sustainable in their lives, you know, it does have a massive impact when thinking about from one person to thousands to hundreds of thousands to millions to billions. So I think that's something important to keep in mind. So kind of ending on this, I just wanted to share with you a little bit more about the International Coastal Cleanup, which happens all over the world. It looks very different this year. Normally in my September, I'm popping all over the United States to participate in cleanups that we have going on and help plan them and run them. And obviously we are not doing any of that with COVID. And so it looks a little bit different, but we are actually encouraging people, you know, to look at our cleanup map, which I'll share with you the link in a moment, that you can find cleanups that are happening that are socially distanced, that you know, you wear your mask and your gloves and you go out and you pick up trash on a beach, but also looking at, you know, in your own community, if you don't live on the coast, if you don't live near the coast, do you live near a river that you can go to a cleanup? Can you walk in your neighborhood and pick up the trash that is on the ground? I live in Washington, D.C., and every single day I go to take my dog on a walk and I see trash on the ground, and we will, you know, we'll bring a bag with us and just pick it up along the way. So I think being able to do those small actions really helps. So this just gives you a sense in terms of what the International Coastal Cleanup looks like in terms of the last year. So this is just some data points. If you notice, every single item in the top 10 list has plastic in it, including cigarette butts, which do have some like plastic coating. But you'll get a sense in terms of how many people participated, how many countries we were in. Just in terms of, if you look at all these different items, food wrappers and beverage bottles and cups and caps and plates and stuff, all of that, we use those in events in so many different ways. And so if we can work on reducing our impact on that, imagine the impact that it'll have on the ocean. So this year we are encouraging people to clean on despite the COVID-19 pandemic, obviously in the safest way possible. And this is the 35th year that we've been doing the International Coastal Cleanup. And if you visit www.wecleanon.org, it'll show a map, a global map, where you can kind of zoom in into your area and be able to look to see what is going on. Normally we celebrate the International Coastal Cleanup during the month of September, and usually it's the third week in September that we do a lot of our events. This year with COVID, we're kind of celebrating it September and October, obviously with everything going on. So I will leave that. I'll put the link in the chat as well, just so that you can see it. But that is basically all that I had. And actually, I'll just leave the screen up if that's helpful. And then if anyone has any questions, but I encourage you to definitely check out that link. If you want to learn more about us, let me know. And I'm happy to pass along my contact information. If you have questions, want to chat after, share resources, any of that, I'm always happy to connect with fellow event professionals and, you know, be able to share resources, especially during the time that we have going on. So.
Thank you so much, Jacob. I was engrossed in it. I loved it. I thought it was great. And I hope everybody that was on the call enjoyed that as well. Thank you for Jacob, thank you for taking your time to partner with us. I think it was really informative. And like I say, it's nice to hear this from somebody that walks and talks it and lives it every day as an event professional with this focus on, obviously, on Ocean Conservancy. So I just want to say to everybody, thank you for taking the time, and hopefully anything you've learned put into place, and we can all make a difference to help preserve our beautiful planet that we live on. Because we all need to do our bit at the moment, I think.
Exactly. Yeah. And I thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate everyone that took their time today to join and be able to listen in and kind of have some conversation around it. And yeah, if there's anything else, let me know. I'm happy to stay on for a few minutes. Otherwise, hopefully we'll connect again soon. And thank you so much for your support, you know, through your business for our Business Champions program, because that's definitely something that we really appreciate. It really helps. And it really helps, you know, fund the programs that we have. So it's super important, and we're just very grateful.
No, I'm honored to be part of it. It's, you know, something that's close to, like I say, close to my heart. So to me, it was the obvious choice. We'll share that. It has been recorded, so we will share that, and we'll actually put it on our YouTube channel as well. So if anybody would like to review that, and please share it with your colleagues, your friends, your co-workers, anybody that you think would take the time to look at it, and together we can all make a difference. So thank you very much for your time today. Does anybody have any other questions before we sign off today? No? I think we had a lot of them in the chat. So, and thank you very much. A lot of comments, Jacob, that great presentation. So,
oh, thank you.
Really, really, really appreciated it. And hopefully, maybe we can make this an annual thing, right?
Yeah, that'd be awesome.
Yeah.
And hopefully my light will not give out next time. It flopped right off the back of my computer. So.
We didn't notice.
That's the working from home thing we all have to deal with, right? It's part of every day these days. So I just want to say, okay, well, thank you very much, everybody. And thank you for taking an hour out of your day to listen to this really important topic. Appreciate it.